Good afternoon, everyone. The penultimate session before a brief closing remarks. We thought it would be quite nice to have a bit of a panel discussion. So we've got 4 colleagues with me here, and my job is to be the chair of the session and to make sure these 4 keep to time and keep in order and answer your questions. I'll just point out that Lauren's here. For anybody who wasn't able to join us at the reception on Wednesday evening and were interested in seeing Lawrence's lab where he's doing the 4K television, Lawrence is quite happy to take people upstairs and show them if they have time this afternoon once we're completely closed here. So if anybody would like to go and see Lawrence's labs upstairs, if you would just like to wait after we finally close the whole thing, Lawrence will take anyone who wants to see that upstairs. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the way this panel session is going to work, we've got George, Anjay, Lawrence and Andy, each in a sense representing a different part of the industry. And I'm going to ask each one in turn just to introduce themselves to you very briefly. 2 of them have, these 2 have already spoken, you know who they are, but we'll still go through that process. And then I want each of them to give their personal view as to, from their point of view, what they think the next 5 years, that's the time frame, what are the big opportunities, what are the big challenges as they perceive them that we all have to consider. So what I thought we would do is we'll go outsides and then we'll do the 2 insides. So I'm going to ask George to first of all introduce himself and then to give his brief views and comments about what the next 5 years might offer.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nigel. Hopefully you can hear me. My name's George Williamson. I just counted it up. I've 38 years experience in telecommunications since I started work on System X development. And Andy talked about the closure of the public switch telephony network. That was the one that we deployed extensively in the UK from 1985 onwards, the local exchange there. Since then, I've worked on things like artificial intelligence, would you believe? I did some work on that for a while. I did some work on advanced information processing applied to operational support systems. I was chief engineer of BT's network management department for a while and divisional lead for all of that software development. And since 2006, I was first Director of Strategic Network Design for OpenReach and then Chief Engineer for OpenReach until I left there in January 2014. While at OpenReach we did all of the next generation access planning, the mixed economy model, Ethernet bit stream delivered wholesale products based on fibre to cabinet, VDSL and fibre to premise. So I can cover that one. More recently I've been an independent consultant, so I have worked for equipment vendors, I've worked for investors and analysts. I've worked for a predominantly mobile operator in the Caribbean, and I have worked with a satellite consortium as well, so I can cover some of those aspects insofar as they address broadband delivery. Do you want me to cover the challenges now, or shall we do that later?
Let's hear your view on the next 5 years.
Well, again, in the next 5 years, it's across all countries, it will be a growing story of coverage and capacity. It will be about closing digital divides, and it will be about getting the right match of expectation for the kinds of speeds and quality of service that these networks need to deliver, whether these are fixed or mobile, in order to meet the application demands. And Doug, I think earlier on, set out a very neat way and rigorous way of estimating the kinds of application demands based upon the things we know about. And I'm going to boil it back to an example that I was given back in 2006 by Accenture when we were embarking on what was OpenReach's next generation access plan. And that is that as far as networks are concerned, access networks, the physics of the garden shed apply. And for anybody who's ever built a garden shed, you know that you build the garden shed and it fills up with stuff. And it usually fills up with stuff because other people have put it there and they've not necessarily had so much skin in the game on building the garden shed as you have. So we can't anticipate what kind of stuff's going to go into this. I don't think it's going to get to these gigabit levels in the way that Doug has said, but that doesn't mean that people won't want to buy it.
Okay, good, George. Andy, what do you, well, they know you, but just introduce yourself again. And
I will indeed. Good afternoon. My name's Andy Sutton. I'm a network architect within the architecture and strategy team within BT Technology, where I'm responsible for mobile network architecture evolution. I focus on kind of maintaining an oversight of the end-to-end mobile network whilst working specifically on RAN architecture evolution, that's a radio access network, and the kind of RAN connectivity requirements, so mobile backhaul, fronthaul, and the like. I've worked in telecommunications since the mid-1980s, predominantly in mobile, with a lot of transmission and network synchronization in there as well. I joined BT from their acquisition of EE, where I did a similar role to what I'm doing now, focused very much on the 4G network at the time, and I went into EE from Orange, where I'd worked for many, many years, being part of the technical team that launched the Orange network in the UK back in the 90s. During that period, I also worked in Orange Group as part of France Telecom's technical team based in Paris. So what's likely to happen in the next 5 years? Well, one thing I can guarantee is we'll see lots and lots of 5G rollout. And that 5G rollout will start in the urban centres. It'll start to address the enhanced mobile broadband use case. But in parallel with that, I think we'll start to see some specialist deployments to support rural use cases, to support certain kind of applications with regards to transportation. There's a whole bunch of verticals we want to address in 5G, but this is going to take some time. So enhanced mobile broadband will be the first step. As we start to look at the kind of wider 5G market opportunity, we need to see a greater geographical rollout, and for that we need to have access to a broader range of spectrum, including more lower band spectrum as well. And for those who are tracking it, you'll be aware that there's an auction planned probably next year at some point for 700 megahertz. So that would be of interest as well. But then on the flip side, we've also got plans to look at spectrum in the 26 gigahertz band as well. So spectrum that allows us to deliver very, very high area capacity density, and spectrum that allows us to deliver much wider geographical coverage will both be essential components of that rollout. And that will impact the cell layers we deploy as well. So from traditional macro cells we have today, down to the kind of microcells, the streetworks type columns we have today, and right the way into very small cells as well. We'll increasingly see more bespoke solutions as we push into those kind of other vertical opportunities, so factory automation, maybe healthcare, opportunities in education on campus, etc., where potentially things like VR are going to be extremely advantageous. So I think there's lots of new opportunities there, but the cost of addressing those opportunities could be significant. We talk a lot about ultra reliable and low latency communications in 5G, but ultra reliable and low latency communication comes at a cost. It's not the same cost point as delivering an enhanced mobile broadband network. There is an impact on the link budget, there's an impact on the coverage, and there's a whole bunch of technical requirements around delivering that reliability as well. So I think we'll see business models where we start to address specific use cases with specific solutions from the 5G toolset. We've heard a little bit already from various colleagues about kind of new applications within broadcast as well. So we're going to see more and more traffic on the uplink. That's not to suggest the uplink is going to be anywhere near the amount of traffic we have on the downlink, but we'll see the uplink becoming an important component that we want to monetize within the network. We do actually have a customer now that takes a petabyte bundle from us who are working in the broadcast industry. So we're looking at other opportunities around that. On the flip side, Hassan talked about EMBMS, so introducing kind of mobile broadcasting and multicasting as well. We're doing a lot of work in that area at the moment, and we would see those services coming to market in the fullness of time. They could address traditional kind of broadcasting of content. They could deal with things like iOS upgrades through multicast. There could be potential applications in retail as well for multicast to certain users in certain areas. So a whole bunch of new business opportunities to explore. We've heard in the last couple of talks about fixed mobile convergence as well. We have now got a hybrid product in the marketplace, so you can get a product today that gives you both fixed and mobile access to boost the home broadband experience. We'll continue to develop and evolve those kind of products and solutions for a wider range of use cases as well. So, a few thoughts.
Right, good. Thank you, Andy. Andrzej.
Good afternoon, everyone. Andrzej Dulka, in telecom business since '94, starting with AT&T, then Lucent Technologies, then Alcatel-Lucent, now with Nokia, and believe I didn't change my job. That was never. That was the companies that changed the names, they merged, they acquire each other. If I look at Nokia today, I think, okay, there is Alcatel, there is Lucent there is Siemens there is Nortel there is Nokia there. Who else I missed in the market, you know? So, okay. But I don't dare to speak on behalf of the whole telecom business industry. Yeah, that's not me. And being in such honorable team, well, I will confess I did PhD in automation a long time ago. So each 4 years the number of information is doubling. I did it when I was 28, so today I calculated it's tiny fraction of the PhD that I did there, because it's like a single % today, or even a promille of that knowledge. You know, I'm fascinated with this conference, and I was accepting that in schizophrenic way. One as engineer and the second as a human being, yeah? And well, that might be the same, yeah? And that's not like Mr. Jekyll and Dr. Hyde, or whatever, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I always confuse who was the doctor, who not. You know, one, being engineer, I can see a couple of challenges, and one reflection, you know, believe that or not, after today's conferences, 5G is not about media, yeah? And 5G is about things. And I'm thinking how much the world has changed, you know. I remember strogers being sold in Poland, and I remember PSTN being deployed in Poland with a cost of $100 or $250 per each subscriber. Yeah? This was a business case. And you know, people were talking at that time. And then came a huge revolution, because suddenly I realized that things start to talk, things start to communicate, yeah? And now I'm to my horror, I'm embracing that things start to make decisions. Not only reaction, it's not only automation what I studied, but things start to think and make decisions without people. And that's the revolution that is coming. One of the challenges, it's very dull. The challenge is very dull. The spectrum tenders, the business case, will it fly? It doesn't fly, because today is only voice, sorry for the word, voice only, and media only. Yeah? But the Internet of Things doesn't fly off. So 5G, there is not a business case. But on the other side of my brain, the schizophrenic side of my brain, I'm thinking, you know, today Nokia in the networks is already deploying artificial intelligence. Believe that or not, there are networks deployed in one of our customers in US. I don't believe I have the right to quote its name. When the software is analyzing patterns of the network, it's not reacting automatically. It learns the patterns. It makes intelligent decisions, and based on that, without informing people, well, communicating, but without informing what and why, it starts to make decisions, it starts to make projections, it starts to prepare the network for the future, what could happen in 1 hour, 2 hours, or next day. Yeah? So we already have that artificial intelligence embedded into network, already happening there, and I'm thinking, am I scared with that or not? Am I afraid or not? And as an engineer, I said, hooray, yeah? As a person, I'm saying, wow, And you know, my roots, as you understand, come from AT&T and from American culture of business, if I may say so in UK. Okay. So I said that, assuming it's true. So, okay, coming from the American culture of doing business, you know, I recall one person. Do you know who is John Henry? You heard about John Henry? You probably heard. Or if not, well, it makes my story juicy and easy. Yeah? And I will move you back to year 1800. 1800, a huge revolution in US. A steam engine has been discovered, and the guys who are using their muscles to go through Rocky Mountains and others, they realize they have a competition. The competition is the steam engine, yeah? And John Henry was the guy who stood against a steam machine and said, I will be better and more efficient. Because like today, he was afraid of the steam machines. I'm afraid of the artificial intelligence. And you know, he stood against the steam machine, he won. He was quicker. He was more efficient. And the beautiful songs that Americans sing about John Henry is that his heart didn't stand the competition and he died because he was so exhausted after winning. Yeah? And then I remember the 1970s or 80s, I believe. Deep Blue, you remember? Yeah. You remember, but you remember Garry Kasparov. Yep. Hooray. You don't know the same pattern with John Henry, but okay, Garry Kasparov is the same problem on different level. Yeah? He stood against a machine. He won, like John Henry the first time, while he was defeated the second time. Yeah? And everyone says, machine beat Kasparov. Yeah. Bullshit. That's not true that machine beat Kasparov. This was a group of engineers who developed the software. There was a group of people who developed the chips. There were engineers who put that all together. So Kasparov was not defeated by a machine. Kasparov was put by common intelligence of people. That's my deep belief. Only human can defeat human. Only human can beat human. If you are hit by a hammer, probably there is a man behind. Yeah? If you are defeated by Deep Blue, there were a group of very intelligent people who defeated Kasparov. Well, it doesn't improve my self-confidence when I'm thinking about artificial intelligence. There is a group of intelligent people behind this artificial intelligence there, because the artificial intelligence is kind of spooky for everyone. Yeah? I think, you know, coming to the challenge in the 5 years to come, 5 years is an epoch in telecommunication. It's era. If you ask me today about what will happen in 5 years, you ask the right person, because I'm extremely good at projections. And I'm very good in projecting the past. I have problems projecting the future. You know? So here, my accuracy is less, but you know, where I see the biggest challenge, and we could talk frequency, we could talk money, we could talk business cases, we could talk, the biggest challenge and the biggest problem I see in our education. In educating our children and ourselves for the world to come in 5 years. Because, look, we are only responding to what is happening. We are enfloated in the internet, and we sank in the ocean of information, and we just don't know what to do, because our education is on reading, our education is on old style. We are human beings, we develop much slower than the machines. I believe what we need to do in the schools, prepare our children for not competing against artificial intelligence. Nobody is afraid today of drilling with an electrical machine, yeah? Nobody today is afraid of using computer. We need to teach and prepare our children to be open and creative enough to teach our children how to utilize artificial intelligence, how to make it a tool, not a competitor. If we'll be fighting against steam machine, if we'll be fighting against computer, if we'll be fighting against artificial intelligence, it's the same pattern. We need to teach our children how to use that. We need to be prepared, because 5 years is a huge time. I have to be prepared how to live and how to utilize artificial intelligence. I believe this is the biggest challenge that we have. We all talk about technology. I'm an engineer, I love technology. We all talk about technological progress, that's great. But the problem is us, the problem is people. We need to develop ourselves to stand the new development. That's the biggest challenge. And of course there is problem with frequencies, there's problem with spectrum, there's problem blah, 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 blah. Engineers solve that. What engineers will not solve is the human being. And that's probably the biggest challenge that I see today.
It's quite a big challenge, isn't it?
Right. Well, I have a son and a daughter, so yeah.
Food for thought there, Andy. Yeah. Lawrence.
My name's Lawrence Murphy. I'm Programme Leader for Media Technology at Salford University. I'm based here at Media City. My background's broadcast engineering, so I also started in 85, which is odd because 85 keeps on coming up on the panel. I worked for a number of broadcast companies, worked in systems integration, system design, as well as operational broadcasting and broadcast engineering. Next 5 years is going to be a really groundbreaking time for broadcasting because it's not going to exist in 5 years' time. Broadcasting as a definition will more than likely disappear because we don't broadcast anymore. We'll be in the business of distributed media. That's why I liked the title of the conference, Delivering Media, because that's what we're in the business of doing from now on. With us, you saw it from some of the earlier slides from a couple of the presentations. Even though we have a legacy system of broadcasting across Europe, the viewership is going to go down, the projected viewership is going to go down significantly in the next 5 years. Over the next 10 years, it will almost double its decline. So what standards and what challenges are we going to look at that the media is going to create that the telecoms companies are going to have to contend with? Everybody gets fixated by resolution. Yeah, we've gone from standard definition to HD to 4K to 8K. Resolution isn't as big a problem as people think. It's a tangible problem. It's number of pixels. There are other problems that we're going to bowl your way, which are things like changing the bit depth, changing the actual amount of information per pixel. So broadcasting is based on 8-bit at the moment. We're increasingly moving to 10-bit to support high dynamic range. Dolby Vision across the OTT networks is looking at 12-bit per pixel. So you've got a fundamental building block that suddenly is creating massive storage challenges, massive bandwidth issues. So we know that's happening, so what are we going to do about it? Well, that's where, when I was talking about my presentation, next generation codecs come into it, because what we've got to do is we've got to strike a balance between how to handle all that extra data, all that high dynamic range, all that resolution, all that extra pixel depth, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You know, there's a thing I get my students to recount as a sort of a mantra, which is high definition is impossible without compression. Compression is the enemy of HD. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So basically, we couldn't do high definition television until we had digital, until we could compress the signals properly. Yeah, we tried it, we did analog HD. It was just massive, and there wasn't, you know, we'd have had one terrestrial channel at the time. But what we're trying to do now is think about how we can make those codecs more fleet of foot, make them do what we need, without, when you receive your signals onto your brand new 88-inch 8K TV that you've got in your living room, when you put it up on the screen, because it's been encoded to handle the bandwidth from point A to point B, suddenly it looks like a Monet painting. Yeah? And we've and it sounds like we're going backwards with challenges, yeah, to things we sorted out in the late 90s, early 2000s. It isn't that. It's that we're the broadcast end of the industry is continually adding complications that aren't going to stop. We're talking 12-bit, we're talking 14-bit, 16-bit. If you start talking about digital cinema distribution over comms networks, digital cinema distribution is not going to want to stick at 12-bit per pixel. It's going to want to go higher. So one of the presentations earlier on was talking about this premium, middle, and yeah. So that premium service is going to need to tackle a variety of challenges that we've gone nowhere near so far. I mentioned holography yesterday. There are other expansions on VR and AR which are going to cause significant challenges. We are building the tools to deal with it, but we've got to strike a balance between them to actually be able to support them across the network. Because if there's no point in us doing it, if we use your shed analogy, if we build this utopian, very complicated broadcast distributed media system, but nobody actually wants it, nobody actually is prepared to pay for it, nobody is prepared for their mobile bill to be quadrupled because it's going to be supporting Netflix that you use 3 or 4 times a day. Yeah, so there's going to be, it sort of moves forward and backwards, checks and balances over the next 5 years, because it's going to be a changing landscape. It's going to look nothing like, in 5 years' time, media distribution is going to look nothing like it looks now, today.
Right, now there's food for thought then. So whilst I just recap that, we're interested in your views, because this is a discussion, roundtable panel. So have a think about what's been said. George was talking about capacity, coverage, digital divide, but he also said, he's a shed analogy, we all like that, aren't we? You can't predict, you can't anticipate what's really coming, and that's what sometimes catches you out. We don't know what we don't know, and that's often what becomes a challenge. Andy was talking about the new developments in 5G, the need to come up with bespoke solutions for certain niche applications, the need to have ever smaller cells and the implications of that. The demands for ultra reliability are great on paper, great from an engineering point of view, but their costs are frightening. So could we afford to deliver some of those things? Those are some of the issues Andy talked about. Anjay here, talking about artificial intelligence. They've all brought a different perspective to the debate this afternoon. Artificial intelligence, not our enemy, something that we have to make work for us and with us. And how do we educate the next generation to exploit these tools that we're developing? So there's an impact on myself, who works in an academic institution, education. Then that's an issue for us to think about in education, and there's a real challenge there. And Lawrence here, who's saying we won't be doing broadcasting in 5 years' time. We've predicted, the 57th FITCE Congress has predicted the death of broadcasting. Now there's a headline, and he said it. There's a headline from this, the Congress with Contribution.
If you listen, you can hear all the broadcast engineers from the companies around us coming around to give me a good kicking.
But there's a man behind that mallet.
True, true.
The point is, new forms of distribution will really take off in the next 5 years. Yes. And from a networking point of view, delivering that's going to become an increasing challenge, because not so much the pixel count, but the number of bits behind those pixels will be the big one that we have to be ready for. So interesting here, we've had 4 different perspectives of essentially the broadcast telecoms industry. Now, has that stimulated anyone in the audience to either ask a question or perhaps to put a counter view or to amplify any of those? Have we got any responses from the audience? We're all looking at me now very blank, saying, oh, don't look at me. And was that you, Andy? Rowani here's got we just got my colleague Rowani Odom here, who's got a roving microphone. So if you do have a question, please wait till the microphone reaches you. Andy.
A very stimulating set of challenges for the audience to think about. So thank you for that. One of the things that occurred to me is the future, what we've recognised that maybe the commercial model that we sort of alluded to but we haven't really gone into is going to be a big impeditor to rolling out 5G, for example, and so on. So if, and it's a bit of a cliche, over-the-top services takes all the sort of profit and revenue from the result of moving to the new 5G rollout, using to greater broadband and AI and so on. If there isn't sufficient return for the operators and other players who need to invest, will this actually happen? Do we see the current situation being sustainable? If not, the change to the current commercial model is an important forecast factor.
Yeah. So what I think you're suggesting, Andy, is obviously the money goes to the OTT provider from us, the customer, but that none of that necessarily filters through to the providers to actually make the infrastructure that works. I mean, George, you've got a lot of experience of revenues and cost models. What do you think?
I mean, what we found was that within the UK and jurisdictions, geographies, there's typically a wholesale model, access model, and then there are retailers above that. The thing that we found in the UK was that through successive generations of broadband, even though the speeds were increasing significantly, the customer's propensity to pay you extra money for higher speed wasn't always there. And that meant that it was a challenge. And the way that the regulator in the UK approached it was the regulator in the UK was very keen to stimulate a competitive environment between competing network operators in order to promote the next move. So, for example, the stimulation of DOCSIS 1, DOCSIS 2 capabilities from cable with hybrid fibre coax, stimulating the need for exchange-delivered ADSL and then ADSL 2+. The ADSL 2+ being deployed by competitive ISPs as part of an LLU type model. You know, that competitive dynamic was the thing that was put in place each time. And what's that going to happen in the UK on the fixed side over the next few years is that the regulator has stimulated another competitive race, and that competitive race is partly through the cable companies using DOCSIS 3.0 currently, but potentially 3.1 within current footprint, but also because there are probably some tax advantages for US firms investing back in the UK, amongst other things. They can see a way in which they can justify the investment in additional networks, some DOCSIS, some fibre to premise, to expand their footprint and offer higher speed services. So that's what they're calling the ultra-fast arena, up to 300 megabits. That in turn will stimulate the national incumbent, which is BT and Openreach, to build out more fibre, and they've indicated a fibre first strategy now, which is try to find the right way in which they can maximise the deployment of fibre to premise, albeit with a very, very challenging business case with very long payback periods. Some of that based upon speed increase, I'm sure, and some of it based on increasing reliability. But the other neat thing that the regulator has done is they found additional investment from new competitive fibre builders. So there are companies like City Fibre Networks who are partnering now with Vodafone and have an intention to get 1 million homes passed by 2020 with a potential to increase to 5 million. There are companies like Hyperoptic who are doing very well building into multi-dwelling units. They target that as a specialist area. There are even companies like GigaClear who are building in rural areas and working out neat ways in which they can engage the local rural communities who feel underserved, indeed to do some of their own dig as part of the installation process. So the competitive dynamic is running. That will force the fixed line operators to find some investment. and that investment will be part there to deliver fibre to premise, and part there to deliver the fibre infrastructure, which is the necessary backhaul part to the 5G deployment. So 5G doesn't happen without high capacity fibre backhauls. So that would be part of my thing. So propensity for customers to spend much more money for the broadband service, not great. And even if you can get a small supplement, it falls off quite quickly as people just expect the norm. And the competitive dynamic forces the operators to innovate to reduce their cost base. So that's one of the big drives. But competitive dynamic forces operators to invest on long-term business cases in order to stay in the marketplace.
It will continue to be ever competitive. Now, I'm just conscious what I'd like to do is try and get as many questions in as we possibly can. So rather than ask every member of the panel to comment on every question, have we got another question? We have. Rawani, just on the right-hand side, we have a question.
I would like to refer to the last question of Andy. Yesterday we have heard the interesting story of BT Sports that is turning telecom customers into telecom customers plus service customers like BT Sports Channel customers. It's the only story I've heard so far. So what are the difficulties and the experiences in your approaches in order to achieve that? And do you think there are new opportunities which show a better chance to get into the application into the regime of the application layer for telecom operators? One example, in order to bridge to our next conference in Ghent, which is about IoT and smart cities. What is your perspective there? Do you think you can achieve to be an IoT or smart city service provider, for example?
So, Andrzej, you talked about things and,
Right.
and you talked about customers here, perhaps changing what a customer is.
About money, yeah?
Everything's about money.
I always ask my wife, yeah? So, you know, consulting with my wife about that subject, I have two opinions, yeah? First of all, I will share with you my private observation why the service providers are in such problem. And that's my thought, maybe not original, but sometimes I think, yeah? So, you know, when I look at the business of service providers, I see a business that is moving 3 speeds at the same time. And if anything moves at 3 speeds at the same time, you know what happens, the fragmentation, yeah? If my legs move 100 miles per hour, my stomach 50 and my head 5, well, I'm in a huge problem. And service providers are in huge problems because of, for that particular reason. Why? Service providers today are actually 3 businesses. They are long infrastructure service providers like passive network. Passive network is deployed with a return of 20-30 years. And who invests in passive networks? It's pension funds. They are interested in very long, reliable business that returns in 20-30 years. Now, then we are going into electronics. Electronics, we know all. Life cycle of electronics is how much? 10 years. Intelligence of that is probably 2 years. So what is the return? Probably, if you buy a computer, you think in 3-4 years I will be replacing that. Well, businesses, they do it longer, then prolong that to 10 years, yeah? But 10 years is absolutely different investment fund and different capital interested in investing in that particular business. And then we are talking applications. What is the life cycle of an application? Sometimes it's a week, 2 weeks, Champions Leagues, Olympic Games. You set an application for that particular business and you get return. You expect huge returns in weeks, maybe a year. And think of the poor CFO of that company. What have I to do? Free businesses. That doesn't fly. Nobody invests consistently in such business. So in my opinion, it will lead to those free business to separate. There will be passive infrastructure operators consistently invested and investing in that, active part and on top of that applications. In my opinion, service providers have to make a rational decision in which part of the business they want to be. If I sit in 3 cartridges and they move 3 different speeds, I better choose one, yeah? So they are in dilemma right now because they want to be free in one, that doesn't work. So if they make the decision and if they go for a certain business, they will achieve nirvana, peace. They will know how to invest. Nothing bad in being utilities. I drink water, I produce something that utilities utilize. It's not bad to be in a utility business. It's only how to earn on it. This is the problem. And the second thought, my second thought, we are talking about earning money. Probably I will recall. It will come back.
But I think it's an important point about the dynamic, aren't you? You talk about utilities, and I think telecoms is now seen as a utility, but what's the innovation in electricity? What's the innovation in gas? What's the innovation in water? It's nothing in comparison to the innovation in the telecoms network.
You gave me 10 seconds for my second brain to connect to my first brain. You know, I not only I think sometimes I read, yeah? Being dyslexic, it's a challenge, but there are books worthwhile to read. And there is such book from Bell Labs. Bell Labs is a development center of AT&T. I work for AT&T. It was development center for Lucent Technologies. I work for Lucent Technologies. It was a development center for Alcatel-Lucent. I worked for Alcatel-Lucent. And it's a development center for Nokia. I work for Nokia. Yeah? Like parallels are pure stachostic. Don't think I'm Bell Labs. Okay, they wrote an interesting book about the future of the network, the vision. Yeah. And I have a lot of anecdotes about that book, but one of the things I read in that book, the book was written like 5 years or 10 years ago. They write in 2020 there will be in the world 5 or 10 global service providers, yeah, and there will be like 100 of local service providers, each with different value proposition and advantages. The global service providers I envision like Netflixes of that world, and they come with global reach, the capacity of global company, and they provide a unanimous global service. And the advantage of the locals guys, they have the intimacy with the customer. Yeah, they are local. And actually, you're absolutely right. When I think what could be the advantage of local service providers in Poland, in Germany, in other countries, well, if they go, they could go with the fight against Googles and Amazons to grasp a bit of that pie from their revenue. The much smarter is to create new business and be advantages in the new business in localization of certain services. Smart cities, excellent. Internet of Things, the local guys that will be deploying businesses locally, they will not go for Amazon to control their machines. They will go to Deutsche Telecoms of this world, to Oranges of this world, to Polish Telecoms of this world, to provide security and intimacy and knowledge of those local cities. If they concentrate on where their advantage is, not compete with the giants, but be very good in the area that they operate, they will again achieve nirvana and money with that.
We're always, no, it's okay. We are actually always against time with these things. So what I would like to do is just very briefly ask Andy and Lawrence if they have any final thoughts before we close this panel, because this was kind of a bit like your bespoke comment earlier, wasn't it? Andy, you got to...
Yeah, indeed, yeah. I mean, it would be very easy to think, oh my gosh, we're all doomed. But I think quite the opposite, actually. I'm really excited about the future of telco. And if we look at what's happening with 5G in particular, Firstly, we're going to reduce our cost to serve. It's going to be much cheaper to deliver a bit on a 5G network than it is on 4G, than it is on 3G before that. We've got some massive advantages coming with things like massive MIMO and spatial multiplexing that increase area capacity density through improvements in spectral efficiency. So I think we've got that advantage firstly. Secondly, the number of opportunities we can address with 5G as we develop the technology beyond enhanced mobile broadband is huge. There are many, many private networks around the country built to support other utilities, for example, built to support other applications. ESN, the Emergency Services Network, is a perfect use case of how we can take highly expensive capability and build it on commercial mobile networks. So I think there's lots of new opportunities there. And thirdly, the over-the-top players are probably going to increasingly become through-the-middle players, because they're going to need to interact with the edge of the network. They're going to need low latency. They're going to need a new business model and a new way of working with local service providers. So I think those three things means the future's pretty bright.
Is it orange?
Those are the old days.
Those are the old days, yes.
Absolutely.
How about the man who's predicted the end of broadcasting? Have you got a final thought?
The future will evolve for this part of the industry because we're collaborating. It's a collaboration will make the 5 years, 10 years, make the media distribution evolve in Europe to the point where we've got a world-beating system, but we've got to be adaptable. And it doesn't mean we just work with Europe. It means we work with companies internationally. We work with the American companies, hopefully, when they've got someone who's we can actually deal with. But that's another problem. So I think the future's bright, but what we've got to do is we've got to build in a lot more collaboration.
And I think that's a nice thought, because that's kind of the theme that we've brought together here over the last 2 days. It is about broadcasting and distribution and telecommunications as delivery, and it is the synergy between them that really will allow us to deliver and consume digital media, which is what we set out to debate over these 2 days. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you to thank our panel for their contribution and their thoughts. That's George, Anjay, Lawrence and Andy.